why is it that the world only values you when you have power, but forgets your worth when you simply need help? The storm had no mercy that afternoon. It pounded down like the fury of something ancient and forgotten, relentless, soaking, uncaring. Thunder cracked across the open sky like a judge slamming the gavel, final and sharp. And on a deserted road in the middle of nowhere, a man named Miles Carter, 47 years old, sat behind the wheel of his luxury black Mercedes-Benz, slowly watching control slip through his fingers. Miles wasn't just anyone. He was the Miles Carter, Wall Street icon, billionaire entrepreneur, a man who'd built an empire with his bare hands and a brain wired for ruthless precision. His time was worth millions. His decisions shaped industries. And yet here he was, stranded on a muddy roadside with a flat tire and no phone signal. Utterly alone. Utterly helpless. The GPS had cut out 2 turns ago. The road was narrow, flanked by endless fields blurred by sheets of rain. There were no houses in sight, no gas stations, no signs of life, just gray sky, waterlogged earth, and the quiet ticking of the dashboard clock, each second reminding him he had only 45 minutes left to make the most important deal of his year. A billion-dollar merger waited for him in the city, but time was bleeding away fast. Cursing under his breath, Miles stepped out. The rain instantly soaked his custom-tailored navy suit, flattening his salt and pepper hair and drenching the leather shoes that had never touched a patch of dirt before. The air smelled like wet asphalt and looming failure. He popped the trunk, stared at the spare tire and tools, and froze. He didn't know what to do. He had people for this, assistants, drivers, a staff, but none of them were here. And with no signal and no passing cars, there was no one to save him from the simplest, most human of problems. Miles Carter, who had closed million-dollar deals with a nod and a glance, was completely out of his element. Then, faintly, laughter. It didn't belong. It sliced through the storm like sunlight behind cloud cracks. Miles turned his head slowly, confused. Through the veil of rain, he saw 3 figures on bicycles approaching from the curve in the road. Bright-colored raincoats flapping in the wind, muddy sneakers pedaling fast through puddles. They were boys, teenagers, maybe 14 or 15. The tallest one, a black boy with tight curls under a soaked hoodie and an oversized blue raincoat, raised a hand and called out, "You all right, sir?" Miles blinked. He didn't answer at first. He hadn't spoken to a stranger like this in years, not without an appointment or a motive. But the boys were already off their bikes, heading toward him with casual confidence and concern in their eyes. Their names, he would later learn, were Jalen, Dre, and Micah, 3 best friends from the small town nearby. Their clothes were soaked, their hands scraped with bike grease, but their spirits burned bright through the gloom. And so began a moment that would change everything. But not just for Miles. Because sometimes the most powerful acts come not from those with money, but from those who still know what it means to help without asking, "What's in it for me?" Before we dive deeper into this powerful true story of compassion, transformation, and what happens when humanity meets humility, I want to gently ask you something. Take a breath. Grab a warm drink. Find a quiet seat and give yourself the space to feel what's coming. Because this isn't just a story, it's a reminder. One that the world needs now more than ever. Ready? Let's begin. There's a strange thing that happens when someone who's always been in control suddenly isn't. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's quiet, terrifyingly quiet, like the silence between lightning and thunder. That was what Miles Carter felt the moment his car lurched sideways with a thunderous boom, and the black Mercedes hissed as it rolled to a halt on the side of the road. He gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, his knuckles whitening. The road had turned slick under the torrent of rain, and even the best tires were no match for a well-hidden piece of debris that had shredded the front passenger side wheel. But outside, the sky had opened up as if someone above had split it in half. Raindrops crashed onto the windshield like 1,000 tiny hammers. The wipers fought valiantly but lost against the volume, leaving more smears than clarity. Through the streaks of water, the landscape looked like a blurred watercolor. Trees melting into sky, fields dissolving into road. Miles tapped the steering wheel impatiently. Then again. Then harder. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. His voice barely rose above the storm, but it carried weight. A weight forged from years of authority, of expectation, of never being told no. And yet, the universe didn't care. He checked his phone. No bars. The glowing screen displayed a helpless no signal, as if mocking him. He turned it off and back on again. Still nothing. His eyes flicked to the dashboard clock. He had exactly 44 minutes now. 44 minutes to be in a sleek boardroom downtown, to shake hands with 2 international CEOs, to finalize a deal that could restructure the future of energy investment. And here he was in a puddle of mud, stuck in the middle of nowhere. Miles exhaled through clenched teeth and slowly opened the door. The wind snatched it open the rest of the way, and icy rain slapped his face like a wake-up call from reality. The cold sank into his skin immediately. His suit, navy blue, custom-fitted, Italian wool, was not made for weather like this. It clung to him, sagged at the shoulders, lost its power with every drop. His dress shoes squelched into the mud like a child stepping into a puddle. He hated the sound. It felt too human. He popped the trunk. Inside lay a spare tire, dusty from disuse, and a set of tools that looked more like museum pieces than anything practical. He picked up the jack and stared at it, like it spoke another language. Maybe it did. Miles had never changed a tire in his life. He'd built companies, negotiated takeovers, fired people with a pen stroke, but he'd never held a wrench with purpose. Rain streamed down his face, soaked his collar. His cufflinks, engraved with his initials, glistened briefly before being swallowed by the downpour. He knelt, trying to remember something, anything about how tires worked, but the mud sucked at his knees and the jack slipped from his grasp and landed with a dull thud. Mud splattered his slacks. He blinked against the rain, his hands trembling slightly. He looked out. The road stretched ahead, and behind, like a ribbon unraveling endlessly. There were no cars, no voices, no help. Dismiss the storm, and the silence that followed every curse he muttered under his breath. And in that silence, something broke. Not loudly, not visibly, but somewhere in the part of him that had always believed he was above inconvenience, above vulnerability. That belief cracked, and with it came something unfamiliar. Helplessness. Miles Carter stood, letting the rain pelt him freely now, no longer flinching. His expensive watch was waterlogged, his phone useless, his pride thinning. He tried laughing, but it came out choked, bitter. He felt, truly, for the first time in years, alone. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had private jets, yachts, a team of people who would jump at his command, and yet, when the rubber met the road, literally, none of that mattered. He turned in a slow circle searching for anything, a sign, a house, a barn, even a distant silhouette. Nothing. He stared at the car again, at the flat tire that sat like a collapsed lung beneath the gleaming metal. It was absurd, ridiculous. This wasn't how the day was supposed to go. He was Miles Carter, damn it. And just then, between thunderclaps, through the rain like a radio tuning into a distant frequency, he heard it. Laughter. Not malicious, not cruel, just light, youthful, real. It floated toward him like a memory carried on the wind. He squinted into the rain, eyes narrowing, trying to distinguish shapes beyond the gray. There they were. 3 bicycles appeared from the bend in the road, tires cutting through puddles, water spraying from each rotation. The riders were soaked to the bone, one in a neon orange poncho too big for his frame, another in a hoodie so drenched it stuck to his arms like a second skin. The third had wrapped a trash bag around his shoulders, flapping like a cape behind him. They didn't look like much, but their energy shifted the air. Jalen led the way, his curls matted to his forehead. He was tall for his age, maybe 15, with sharp eyes that scanned quickly. Behind him were Jaya, stockier, with a mischievous smirk, and Micah, slight and quiet, but alert. Jalen raised a hand. "You all right, sir?" Miles didn't answer. Not at first. He looked at them like they were a mirage. Teenagers? In this storm? On this road? It didn't make sense. But they were real, and they were getting off their bikes, walking them to the roadside without hesitation. There was no fear in their steps, only curiosity and concern. "Flat tire?" Jalen asked, already stepping closer. Miles hesitated. He felt the part of himself that wanted to say, "No, I'm fine," the part that had always refused help, that had always believed accepting assistance was a form of weakness. But he nodded. "Yeah," he said hoarsely, flat, "and I don't really know what I'm doing." Jalen crouched by the wheel immediately. "You got a spare?" "In the trunk." "Cool," he said. "We've done this before." Therese snorted. "Mostly on bikes, but it's the same idea." They moved like clockwork. Improvised clockwork. Micah steadied the car while Jalen fetched the jack. Dre took the wrench and started loosening the bolts. They laughed and talked over each other, teasing one another like brothers, splashing mud on each other's legs as if the rain were a game instead of a burden. Miles just stood there, watching. These boys, these kids, were fixing his problem without hesitation, without fear, without expecting anything. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The world he came from didn't prepare him for this. By the time the new tire was on, Jalen wiped his hands on his coat and stood. "All good, mister." Miles looked from the car to the boys, then to the road, then back again, and something inside him shifted. He reached for his wallet, pulled out a stack of crisp bills, but Jalen shook his head. "Nah, it's cool, we were just riding by." "Yeah," Dre added, "and you looked like you needed a hand." Micah nodded. "Besides, you got somewhere to be, right?" Miles stared at them. The words caught in his throat. "Thank you," he finally said. They smiled, hopped on their bikes, and pedaled away, laughter echoing, tires slicing through the puddles. And just like that, they were gone. But the echo remained. Ligaturesque did something else, something As Miles got into his car and the engine roared back to life, he looked at the time. He still had a chance to make the meeting. But that wasn't what he was thinking about anymore. Miles stood by the open trunk of his Mercedes, the rain still falling in heavy sheets around him, yet suddenly quieter somehow. The sound of Jalen, Dre, and Micah's laughter faded slowly into the distance as the boys pedaled away, their silhouettes growing smaller, swallowed by the fog of the storm. He should have felt relief. The tire was fixed. The engine was running. He could still make the meeting. His billion-dollar deal was technically still within reach. But instead of rushing back into the driver's seat, he just stood there, wet, muddy, and moved. The wind tugged at his drenched suit like a reminder. This moment is not done with you yet. Miles looked down at his hands, hands that had once signed mergers with CEOs across oceans. They were trembling, not from the cold, but from something deeper. He could still feel the warmth of Jalen's shoulder brushing past him, the quiet confidence in Micah's eyes, the quick-fingered precision of Dre as he tightened the last bolt. None of them hesitated. None of them asked for anything. That was the part that shook him most. In his world, people didn't act without reason. Everything had an angle, a motive, a strategy. Kindness was currency, used to open doors, climb ladders, earn favor. But those boys, they didn't know who he was. Didn't care. They didn't ask for a photo or a job reference or a scholarship. They saw a man stuck in the rain, and they stopped. That was it. And when he'd pulled out a thick stack of bills, crisp and clean, a symbol of his success, Jalen had simply smiled and waved it off. "It's cool, mister. You looked like you needed a hand." That line echoed now, louder than the thunder rolling across the hills. Miles climbed into the car slowly, turning the key. The engine came to life with a low growl. He stared at the dashboard clock. Bill time. But his hands didn't move. The rain was slowing now, reduced to a soft patter on the windshield. He watched the droplets race each other to the edge of the glass, merging, separating, chasing. Outside, the world was turning gray again. Not storm gray, but something softer, reflective. He gripped the wheel, but instead of driving forward, he leaned his forehead against it, eyes closed. And in that stillness, a memory rose. Not a deal, not a financial conquest, but his childhood. A boy named Miles, maybe 10 years old, standing outside a gas station with a flat bike tire and no one to help. His father had been gone for weeks. His mother worked double shifts. No one stopped, not one adult, until a black mechanic, nameless, smiling, had walked over, kneeled, and pumped the tire full without a word. He'd refused money, too. Miles had forgotten that man's face. But today, decades later, his spirit had returned. This time, in the form of 3 boys with no umbrellas and too much mud on their shoes. A sudden, fierce wind gusted through the trees, causing branches to sway like dancers in mourning. It snapped Miles out of memory. He sat up straighter, checked his mirror. The boys were gone. And then, as if pulled by something older than logic, he turned the car around. Not toward the city, not toward the meeting, but back toward the bend in the road where the boys had first appeared. He didn't know why. Not fully. Not yet. But something in his chest told him, you owe them more than a thank you. Not money, not handouts, but presence, attention, action. He pressed gently on the gas. The Mercedes rolled forward, tires humming on wet asphalt, his reflection flickering in every puddle he passed. The small town emerged slowly, like a secret finally willing to be seen. Wooden houses with chipped paint lined the roads, porches sagging under years of weather. A rusted swing set creaked in the distance, unattended. The gas station sign blinked half-lit letters, snacks, cold drinks, hope. Though the last word was made of peeling sticker remnants and only half the H remained. Miles drove slowly, listening, and then he saw them. Outside a modest diner with a cracked red awning, the 3 boys were leaning against their bikes, passing around a bag of fries, laughing with the ease of boys who hadn't yet learned to be guarded. He pulled over, cut the engine, just stepped out, and walked slowly toward them. The rain had stopped, but the world still held its breath. Jalen spotted him first. His brow lifted in surprise, then relaxed. "Hey," he called, nudging the others. "Look who's back." Micah turned. Dre followed. Their smiles came easy. "Mistu," Dre said. "Car still holding up?" Miles nodded, his voice stuck in his throat. Then finally, "Because of you." He stepped closer, hands at his sides. "I wanted to say thank you. Really, what you did out there, it meant more than you know." Jalen shrugged, bashful. "It wasn't much." "No," Miles said firmly. "It was everything." There was a pause, the kind that asked to be filled with something real. Then he said it. "You reminded me what it feels like to be seen. Not as a title, not as a client, not as some sir in a car, just a person. And I didn't realize how long it had been since someone treated me that way." Micah looked away, uncertain. Jalen said quietly, "Most people don't expect much from us." "Then most people are fools," Miles replied. And there it was, an invisible thread drawn between them, not made of charity or pity, but recognition. That they were different, but in that moment not divided. Miles glanced at their bikes. Rusty chains, worn tires. One was held together with duct tape. "I'd like to do something," he said. "For you three." Dre immediately shook his head. "You don't have to." "I know," Miles said, "but maybe I need to." He paused, looked them each in the eye. "Let me buy you new bikes." The boys hesitated. It was Jalen who finally said, "That's kind of you, mister, but if you really want to help, there's this community center down the road. Roof leaks, no heating. It's where we go after school, but it's falling apart." Miles listened. His gaze sharpened. Then slowly, he smiled. "Tell me everything." The next morning, the storm had passed. The sun broke through the clouds like a silent apology. It glinted off rain-soaked rooftops, glistened on muddy sidewalks, and turned the small town into a mosaic of light and shadow. The earth smelled clean again, raw and alive. For the first time in days, the sky was blue. Not a perfect blue, but a real one. Honest. Miles Carter drove without a tie, wearing a navy pullover and jeans. His silver Mercedes looked out of place on the cracked back roads, but for once, Miles didn't care. He wasn't trying to belong. He was trying to return. Return to the boys who had shifted something in him. Return to the echo of a moment that had stirred a buried part of his soul. That morning, he wasn't a billionaire with a checklist. He was a man chasing purpose. He found Jalen, Dre, and Micah exactly where they said they'd be. Outside the community center, their bikes leaning against the rusting fence like sleeping dogs. The boys sat on the concrete steps, huddled around a handmade sign. "And razor for repairs, every little bit helps." The lettering was crooked, the paint smudged. It was beautiful. They looked up as he approached. "You came," Jalen said, blinking into the sun. Miles smiled softly. "I said I would." He looked up at the building. Time had been unkind to it. The roof sagged in one corner. A shutter dangled loose beside a window smeared with fingerprints and hope. The door was chipped and slightly ajar, like it too had been waiting for someone to care enough to walk through. "Can I take a look inside?" Miles asked. Jalen nodded. "Sure. Just careful with the floor near the hallway. It's soft." Inside, it smelled of dust and distant laughter. Faded murals lined the walls, paintings of handprints, sunflowers, and stick-figure families. A row of beanbags sagged near an old bookshelf with more gaps than books. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead like tired eyes trying to stay awake. But what struck Miles wasn't the disrepair. It was the energy. Even in its decay, this place buzzed with memory. You could feel it in the carpet stains, in the worn-down checkers board on the table, in the echo of sneakers in the gym room down the hall. The boys led him into the main activity room, where a roof leak had formed a growing puddle on the linoleum. Dre pointed to a patch above. "That's the main one," he said. "Sometimes it drips all night." Miles looked up. A single droplet formed, trembled, then fell, and landed squarely in the center of his palm. He stared at it. A tiny circle of water, weightless, but suddenly it felt like the heaviest thing in the world. Later that day, Miles sat across from Karen, the center's director. She was in her late 40s, with weary eyes and sleeves rolled up past her elbows, carrying folders like shields. When she saw him, she almost didn't recognize him. "Mr. Carter?" she asked. Miles stood and extended his hand. "Just Miles, please," she smiled politely. "To what do we owe the visit?" "I met 3 of your regulars yesterday," he said, glancing toward the boys sitting nearby. "They changed my tire in the rain. Changed something else in me, too." He opened his notebook and placed it between them. "I'd like to help." Karen sat slowly, guarded. "Help how?" "Fix the roof, the plumbing, the electrical, update the playground, paint, furniture, heat for winter." He blinked. "That's a lot." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for a pen. "Well," she asked. Miles paused, then looked straight at her. "Because when I had a flat tire, 3 kids gave me everything they had, without asking for a thing in return. This building gave them a place to become that kind of person, and that kind of place deserves to stand." Karen lowered her eyes, voice catching. "No one's ever said it like that." As it worked for hours. They walked every room. She showed him the broken heaters, the closets that wouldn't close, the gym mats that hadn't been replaced in over a decade. They planned, budgeted, dreamed. At one point, Miles knelt down and ran his fingers across a crack in the hallway floor. His hand came up dusty. He stood and pressed that hand to his chest. "This crack," he said softly, "will be gone. But what built this place, that stays." A few days later, trucks arrived. Construction crews stepped out, boots thudding, eyes curious. They weren't used to working in neighborhoods like this. But Miles was there to greet them. He didn't wear a suit. He wore jeans and a t-shirt, and he worked. Yes, Miles Carter worked. He carried boards, hammered nails, tore down rotten ceiling panels, took off his watch and handed out cold water. At one point, a photo was taken of him on a ladder, drilling a new panel in place, sweat streaking through his silver hair. The photo went viral 2 weeks later. But that day, it wasn't about that. It was about Jalen, Dre, and Micah watching him with stunned admiration. It was about Karen walking through the halls with a clipboard and eyes she couldn't keep from welling. It was about kids watching from the fence line, daring to believe that change might look like them. And then came the action that stunned everyone. It was day 6 of repairs. The center had been emptied for safety, but the kids were still around, helping where they could, painting signs, delivering snacks to workers. At noon, a sudden downpour began, unexpected and fierce. Everyone rushed inside the half-finished structure. Workers, kids, volunteers. All except Miles. He walked out into the center of the unfinished playground. Bare mud, wooden frames, nothing finished. And he just stood there, arms open, base of the rain pouring down on him like it had the day his tire blew. Everyone stared. And then Jalen whispered, "He's remembering." It was a moment. Raw, unspoken, powerful. A billionaire, alone in the rain, honoring a storm that changed his life. And then he laughed, loud, from the chest, like something had finally loosened inside him. And in that laugh, the kids joined in. They ran out into the storm, too. Jalen, Dre, Micah, Karen, the construction foreman. They danced, not for photos, not for show, but because sometimes healing looks like a man in the rain saying, "I'm not the same person I was a week ago, and thank God for that." It was the kind of morning that made people believe in beginnings again. The sky had just shaken off the last clouds of spring's final storm, and a golden softness stretched over the little town like a blessing. Trees whispered, flags stirred gently in the breeze, and down on the freshly painted sidewalk of the newly restored Ridgeview Community Center, the air hummed with quiet anticipation. Children in clean clothes clutched their parents' hands. Elderly neighbors who hadn't left their porches in weeks made their way to the center with steady determination. Young teens in oversized t-shirts and bright sneakers ran in excited zigzags, their voices rising like birdsong. It was opening day. The center was done, and Miles Carter stood just behind the newly rebuilt glass doors, watching it all. He wore simple khakis, a white button-up rolled at the sleeves, and no watch. His hair, silver and wild at the edges, caught the light. There was a smear of paint still dried on his wrist, left from the final coat of trim he had insisted on helping with the night before. Karen, the director, stood beside him holding a clipboard, but today she wasn't checking anything. Her eyes were on the people gathering, her lips parted in awe. She looked not like a woman in charge, but like someone witnessing a miracle. "They're really here," she whispered. Miles nodded. They came for this place. Because this place came for them first. Behind them, Jalen, Dre, and Micah peeked from the main hallway, dressed in matching volunteer shirts that Miles had ordered just for today. They had folded chairs, set up lemonade stands, helped sweep the steps. And yet, now, as they saw the crowd swell, their confidence faltered. Micah spoke first. "What if it's not enough?" Miles turned to them. "You see all those people?" They nodded. "They're not here to inspect walls. They're here because of what you built, what you made possible. You reminded them why they matter. You reminded me." Dee glanced at the entrance nervously. "Should we open the doors?" Miles gave the gentlest smile. "Not yet." He stepped forward. Then, with both hands, he pulled the doors wide open. A powerful moment. Not grand, not loud, but sacred. The kind of moment that ripples outward for generations. The crowd didn't rush in. They entered slowly, reverently, like stepping into a memory restored. Parents gazed upward at the new ceiling, no longer stained or cracked. Children ran fingers across freshly painted murals of suns and trees and smiling faces, all hand-drawn by the kids of the town. A woman near the corner reached up and touched the wall as if checking to make sure it was real. Inside the activity room, laughter began to echo again. Not the hollow kind, but full, ringing, honest. The roof no longer leaked. There were books where gaps had once been. The beanbags were plump. The lights glowed steady. The old wooden floor had been sanded and sealed and now carried the proud thuds of sneakers and possibility. Karen led tours. Miles stood near the entrance, shaking hands, nodding humbly. He didn't give a speech. He didn't need to. The building spoke for itself. Outside, Jalen, Dre, and Micah had moved to the playground, now a fully built marvel of color and joy. Swings glinted in the sun. A small zipline line stretched from one tree to another. Monkey bars painted bright blue. Children filled every inch of it, climbing, shouting, laughing. Then it happened. Without warning, Jalen took off his shoes and stepped barefoot onto the wood-chip path leading to the swings. The sharpness of the ground made him wince, but he didn't stop. He walked all the way to the center of the playground. Dre and Micah stared, unsure. "Jalen," Micah called, "what are you doing?" Jalen turned around, smiled. "I was just making sure it's real." He then closed his eyes, raised both arms out to his side like wings. And he spun, Slowly, once, twice, the kind of spin kids do when they feel free. It was small, but it was powerful. A pure act of belief. And others saw it. A little girl copied him, then another boy, and soon a dozen kids were spinning on that playground, arms out, eyes closed, reminding the world what joy looked like. Later that afternoon, as the event wound down, Miles stepped outside to the back of the building. The sun was beginning to set, its orange light pouring over the field behind the center, lighting the grass like flame. Jalen joined him, his cheeks still flushed from laughter. Miles looked at him. "You okay?" Jalen nodded. "Better than okay," he said. "I didn't think any of this would ever happen." Miles looked at the building, the repaired roof, the painted doors, the voices still echoing inside. "It almost didn't," he said. Then quietly, "If you hadn't stopped that day, if you hadn't helped me." Jalen shook his head. "We just fixed a tire." Miles knelt, so their eyes met. "No," he said. "It reminded me I still had a heart." A long pause. Then Jalen asked, "What made you come back?" Miles stood slowly, brushed his hands off on his pants. "Because I couldn't unfeel what you gave me." He looked out across the yard. "Almost. And because I realized maybe the best way to fix myself was to help fix what matters." As dusk settled, Miles walked back through the center one last time. He saw Micah reading a book to two smaller children. He saw Dre arm wrestling a boy in a wheelchair, both of them grinning. He saw Karen laughing, really laughing, with a parent she once argued with over budget cuts. And he stopped. In the hallway, right where he had first run his hand across that cracked tile. It had been replaced now. Smooth. Unbroken. But Miles reached out and pressed his hand to the wall again. Just like before. Only this time, he left it there longer, letting the warmth of what had been rebuilt press back into him. Not just the building, but the connection, the chains. The story could have ended at the ribbon cutting. It could have closed neatly, with applause, laughter, and smiling faces under a golden sky. It could have settled there, in a newly painted community center, a healed man and three boys who once stopped to help a stranger. But kindness doesn't know how to stop. It spread, and like water dropped into stillness, what began with a flat tire on a rainy road began to ripple outward. Quietly, at first, then louder, wider, deeper than anyone expected. It started with a photo. Just a single photo of Miles Carter, standing in the middle of the playground, arms open to the rain, clothes soaked, eyes closed, laughing like a boy who had remembered joy. Someone had captured that moment, raw, unposed, and uploaded it to a small local Facebook page. Within hours, it was shared. And then again, and again. By morning, it was everywhere. But it wasn't just the image. It was the caption, written by Karen herself, who had posted it with trembling fingers. "This man was once too busy to notice people like us. Then three boys helped him with nothing but kindness. Today, he rebuilt the place that raised them." Sometimes, the most powerful transformations begin with simple help. People read it, and something stirred. Local newspapers ran the story. Then regional ones, then national. They came looking for interviews, for quotes, but Miles refused. He didn't want attention. "It's not my story," he said. "It belongs to Jalen, Dre, and Micah." But the boys, shy and overwhelmed, weren't sure how to speak yet, so Miles did what he always did now. He stood beside them. In press conferences, on podcasts, in quiet living rooms turned media stages. Miles let the spotlight fall where it belonged. He sat quietly as the boys learned to tell their truth. Jalen, now sure, once said in an interview, "We just wanted to help, that's all. We didn't think it would become all this." Micah added, "But I guess that's what kindness does. It grows." Then came the letters. Hundreds, then thousands. From parents, children, students, teachers. From people who had been helped once and never forgot. From people who had been ignored once and never recovered. Stories poured in, some just a sentence, others pages long. Your story reminded me of the bus driver who gave me lunch money in 1982. Never told anyone this, but a janitor once stayed with me when I got locked in the school bathroom. I was 6. I still remember. Felt liquid. I've been scared to speak up, but your story gave me courage. Miles read every one, sometimes with a smile, often with tears. One afternoon, he walked into the Ridgeview Center carrying a duffel bag. Karen looked up, confused. "What's that?" Miles opened it slowly. Letters. Printed. Handwritten. Bundles of them. He set them on the floor, then knelt beside them, spreading them out like flower petals. Jalen, Dre, and Micah joined him. "What are we supposed to do with all these?" Dre asked. Miles looked at them, eyes full. "Let's make 'em a wall," he said. They built it in the east hallway, each letter laminated, pasted carefully. A mural, not of faces, but of voices. The wall of quiet stories, they called it. Stories that had been carried alone for too long, now given space to breathe. And people came just to see it. Some traced the words with their fingers, others stood in silence for minutes, then left notes of their own. A girl came with her father, pointed to a letter, and whispered, "That's what happened to me too." And her father, who had never known, began to cry. But the ripples didn't stop there. A donor from Atlanta offered to fund 3 more community centers in underserved neighborhoods. A retired teacher wrote to Miles, offering a library collection she'd saved for decades. A woman in Chicago started a movement called Fix What Matters, encouraging people to take one neglected space in their community and restore it. With or without help, Karen was asked to speak at education conferences. Jalen was invited to a youth leadership summit. Dre wrote a spoken word poem that went viral on TikTok. Micah, quiet, steady Micah, started filming the small acts of kindness he saw daily. His YouTube channel grew from 3 subscribers to 3 million in 6 months. And Miles kept showing up. In jeans, in work boots, at paint drives, at book fairs. Not as the CEO, not even as the guy from the playground. Just as Miles. A man who once broke down on a rainy road and realized he wasn't meant to stay behind the wheel his whole life. One day, as the boys sat with Miles in the new reading room, Jalen looked up. "Do you think this will last?" Miles paused. "What do you mean?" Jalen shrugged. "The center. The attention, the story, all of it." Miles thought for a long time. Then he stopped, walked to the wall of quiet stories, pressed his palm to it, right over a letter that began, "To the janitor who waited with me," and said, "If we keep choosing each other every day, it will." Weeks passed, but the story refused to fade. The town settled into rhythm again. Kids went back to school, the center's walls echoed with after-school laughter, and the new mural out front gleamed brighter with each sunrise. But something had changed. Not in volume, in depth. Every person who had heard the story carried a piece of it with them. It was in the way the cashier smiled longer, the way strangers held doors for each other, the way children spoke softer when they saw someone struggling. It didn't make the world perfect, but it made it softer. And in the world Miles Carter had lived in for decades, where softness was considered a weakness, that was revolutionary. One Saturday morning, Miles arrived at the center earlier than usual. He walked in with two things: a steaming thermos of black coffee, a small brown envelope. He greeted the staff, walked down the east hallway past the wall of quiet stories where someone had taped 5 new letters overnight, and sat alone in the reading room. The air smelled of paper, dust, and early sunlight. Micah entered a few minutes later, camera in hand. He had started documenting a series called Kindness in the Ordinary, short videos capturing unnoticed goodness around town. "Morning, Mr. Miles," Micah said, adjusting his lens. Miles looked up, smiled. "You still filming Hope?" Micah nodded. "It's everywhere now." Miles tapped the envelope on the table. "Come here." Micah crossed over and sat. Miles pushed the envelope toward him. "What's this?" Micah asked. Miles leaned back. "Something you deserve." Micah opened it slowly. Inside, a printed email. Subject line: Youth Documentary Nomination, International Human Spirit Festival. Micah's hands shook slightly. I didn't submit anything." "I did," Miles said softly. "Without telling you. I just thought maybe the world needed more of what you see." Micah blinked hard, then smiled, the kind of quiet smile that meant more than tears. Across town, Jalen and Dre were working on the old basketball court near the center. The sun was hot and the paint cans were nearly empty, but the court lines were beginning to take shape again. Kids watched from the fence, waiting. Jalen stood, stretching his back. "Worship." Dre dipped his roller in yellow paint. "Do you think people really changed?" Dre asked suddenly. Jalen paused. "Not all of them," he said, "but maybe enough." Later that day, Karin called for an all-hands meeting at the center. The team gathered in the activity room, now decorated with collages of kindness, art made by local kids, and a quote on the wall that read, "Be the echo someone needs to hear." Karin stepped forward. "I know we've done a lot," she began, "and I know this place already feels full again." She looked at the staff, at Miles, at the boys. "What? I want us to think bigger." She gestured to the wall. This center was saved because 3 boys did the smallest, most beautiful thing, stopping to help. That act lit a fire. What if we helped others light their own? The room went quiet. Miles grasped his arms. "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" Karin nodded. "We're going to start a program," she said. "We're going to train teens from this town to be community builders. Not just here, everywhere." Jalen's eyes widened. "You mean like we go to other towns?" "Yes," Karin said. "To share the story, to listen to theirs, to build together." Dreft sat up straighter. "Can we call it something?" Micah leaned in. "What about echo teams?" Jun turned. He shrugged. "Because we're not just building places, we're building echoes." Karin smiled. "That's exactly what we're doing." Weeks turned to months, and the echo teams became real. Workshops were held. Young volunteers trained in empathy, leadership, storytelling, repair skills. They carried hammers, cameras, notebooks, but mostly they carried open hearts. The first mission, a broken-down library in a rural town 4 hours away. The second, a basketball court in a city neighborhood forgotten by policy. The third, a youth center in a desert town that had lost its funding. They didn't eat time, they listened first, and helped rebuild, and left behind a story wall like ridge views. And those stories stayed. They weren't loud, but they were unignored. One afternoon, Jalen, Dre, and Micah sat quietly in the van, heading back from an echo site. Sunset flickered through the window. Dre turned to Miles, who was driving. "Did you ever think a flat tire would lead to this?" Miles didn't answer right away. He just grinned, eyes on the road. Then he said, "The tire didn't break my car. It broke my silence. There's a strange quiet that comes after impact. Not absence, but absorption. Like the hush after thunder, or the stillness right before applause." That was the feeling settling over Ridgeview in the weeks after Echo teams began traveling town. The world had noticed, but now was watching, listening, and in that silence, a new kind of power was building. It was late autumn when the phone call came. Karen answered it from her office at the Ridgeview Community Center, the sunlight slanting through blinds behind her. Her pen hovered mid-sentence as the voice on the line, formal, precise, offered something unexpected. The National Foundation for Social Equity was awarding Ridgeview and its Echo Team initiative a national honor, one that would place their story at the center of an upcoming televised gala in Washington, D.C. Karen's first reaction wasn't joy. It was silence. Then a whispered, "Oh, my God." The announcement rippled fast, first through the staff, then the town, then the team. Miles was sitting under the oak tree out back, reading a letter from a school in Montana, when Jalen came sprinting across the field, breathless. "Then Lay picked us," he gasped. Miles looked up. "Who?" Jalen threw his arms wide. "The whole country." The next few weeks were a flurry. Suits borrowed, dresses fitted, passports checked. Micah packed 3 cameras. Dre wrote a speech just in case. Jalen said he didn't want to say anything, but secretly rehearsed in his room every night. Miles, as always, kept the focus grounded. "This isn't about a stage," he said one evening. "It's about a spotlight, and we shine it outward." They nodded and prepared. The night of the gala, the lights were blinding. Jalen stood backstage, hands clenched. Dorit adjusted his collar. "You good?" "I don't know," Jalen admitted. "Feels they..." Micah patted his shoulder. "We're not here because we're perfect. We're here because we cared." The curtain parted. A host in a silver suit introduced them. Photos of the Ridgeview transformation flashed on massive screens. The audience, full of politicians, artists, activists, leaned in. Then came the video. The 5-minute short showing everything. The rave, the flat tire, the center, Naka walls, the playground, the mending. By the time it ended, the room was still, until applause broke like a wave. But before they could step away, the host raised a hand. "Calm a moment," he said. "We have someone else who asked to say a few words." And Miles Carter walked onto the stage. He looked out at the crowd, then back at the boys. He didn't use the mic at first, just threw it, then finally took a deep breath and said, "We measure wealth in numbers, but maybe we should start measuring it in impact. In Nashos, because sometimes the richest moment of your life is when a stranger helps you for free in the rain." He paused, turned to the boys. "And sometimes those strangers become the reason you remember who you are." The next morning, the world responded. News outlets replayed the speech. Social media lit up with the hashtag. "Excellent point," I said. But more than that, action followed. High school principals called to start local Echo teams. Corporate leaders reached out for youth partnerships. A senator proposed a bill inspired by the Echo team's model. The Repair Act focused on investing in neglected neighborhoods, led by young community members. But perhaps the most powerful ripple came from a place no one expected. Miles was in Ridgeview's reading room again when he received a letter, handwritten, smudged in blue ink. Off. He opened it. It read, "Dear Mr. Carter, I was the boy who stood at the window that day you were stuck in the rain. I saw them ride up to help you. I didn't move. I didn't open the door. I told myself it wasn't my business. But it's haunted me ever since. I just wanted to say thank you for showing me what I missed. I promise I won't stay silent again. Miles folded the letter slowly, pressed it to his heart, and closed his eyes. Later that week, he brought the letter to Karen and the boys. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. They mounted it on the wall of quiet stories next to the one that began, "To the janitor who waited." And for a moment, they just stood there, Malcolm, letting the silence between the echoes speak. The wind that swept through Ridgeview that day wasn't loud. It didn't howl or break windows. It wasn't the kind that knocked over signs or tugged branches from trees. But it carried something heavier. It carried change. It moved through streets that had been silent for too long, through porches where neighbors now waved more often, through the halls of the community center, where a new generation no longer whispered their dreams, but spoke them aloud. It was the wind that comes not to destroy, but to stir. And in its passing, it left behind something stronger than brick or paint or program funding. It left belief. On a quiet Sunday, months after the gala, Miles Carter walked alone to the Ridgeview Center. No cameras, no crowd, just him and a sealed wooden box in his hands. Inside were copies of every letter that had ever been pinned to the wall of quiet stories, laminated, protected, preserved. He entered the building slowly, like stepping into sacred ground. The hallways still smelled of chalk and books. Children's laughter trickled in from the basketball court outside. But today, he wasn't there to fix anything. He was there to plant something. He knelt beside the mural in the east hallway, the one that said, "We don't whisper who we are anymore." Then dug a small square into the soil beneath it, where the center's indoor garden had been blooming quietly for months. And he buried the box, pressed the dirt down with both palms. He closed his eyes and said nothing, because sometimes silence is the most honest prayer. Later that week, Karen found a handwritten note in her office mailbox. It wasn't signed. It simply said, "Dear Ridgeview, one day my child will play on the swing you rebuilt. And I'll tell them it was made possible by 3 boys who stopped in the rain. I want them to know. Kindness echoes longer than silence." And it was true, because even when the cameras left, when the press moved on to the next story, the echo stayed. It stayed in the way Dre taught younger kids how to paint the new benches, in the way Micah filmed the janitor quietly fixing a broken window before sunrise, in the way Jalen knelt one afternoon beside a boy crying on the edge of the field, saying only, "You don't have to fix everything today, just stay." And it stayed in Micah. In the way he walked slower now, in how he listened more, in how he called people by name, not by title. And then, one day, almost exactly a year after the tire blew on that rainy road, Miles Carter stood again in the same spot. The highway was quiet, the fields gold, and as if pulled by memory itself, 3 bikes appeared from the horizon. Jalen, Dre, Micah, now a little taller, their silhouettes sharper. They pedaled up, smiling. No rain this time. No emergency. Just reunion. Jalen dismounted first, brushing dust off his jeans. Back where it all started. Miles smiled. "Yeah, except now, we know where the road leads." He paused, then pulled something from his jacket pocket, a tiny tin box. Inside, a spare tire valve. These conversations where they become more polished. He held it out. Micah took it carefully, turning it in his fingers. "It's beautiful," he said. Miles nodded. "It's a reminder," he said softly. "Even the thing that broke you can become part of what builds you." It was quiet, not empty, not over. Just too A boy sat on the rebuilt bench, tying his shoelace. An old man passed by and gave a slow nod. In the distance, laughter rang from the playground. And beside the garden wall inside Ridgeview, the soil above a buried box stayed undisturbed and deeply known. There was no applause, but there was healing. And that, too, is power. The kind that doesn't shout but restores. The kind that doesn't demand credit but plants futures. What followed wasn't a headline or a medal, but a community quietly rebuilding itself, one act of care at a time. What began with 3 boys in the rain had become a blueprint, not just for fixing walls, but for breaking silences, for naming dignity, for reminding us that justice isn't always loud, but it must be heard. The heart of the story, a message for the soul. When we speak of power, we often picture volume, titles, control. But sometimes the truest power is the boy who stays when others walk away. The stranger who chooses to care with no need to be seen. This story is not just about Miles, Jalen, Dre, or Micah. It is about all of us, especially those who once believed their kindness was too small to matter. If you've ever wondered whether one good act could ripple across a lifetime, the answer is here. And if you're someone who has carried the silence of past injustice, let this remind you. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And even the smallest gesture of compassion can break the cycle and begin a new one. If this story moved you, even gently, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel, Unheard Racist Stories. Share this video with someone who still believes in dignity. Let's echo these truths until they're no longer unheard. Thank you for listening. And thank you for walking with us toward a better, fairer world. We'll see you in the next story.